Okay, so in this example, I want you guys to listen up. There should be no more talking at this point. Okay, so when you complete the square, it seems like you kind of go out of order, so I will show you what order we're going to go in. The first thing we're going to do is that whenever you complete the square, normally, and I will say that you can actually be a little trickier with how you complete the square, but for now, I just want to show you the typical way we'll do this. If you find a better way to do it, that's totally fine with me, but this is the first way you can do this. Generally, we will add a number and subtract a number at all times. The reason is we're adding a number to manipulate the equation, and we have to balance it out by subtracting the very same number we add. The reason we do this is to make sure that we do not change the value of our equation. Okay? We'll come back to this because we're not sure what number we're going to add. We eventually will add the number. We will simplify it. So I'm just going to write another step. Usually you'll simplify that number, and then you will eventually factor that number. So if you remember, factoring is like this. And then you will get x. And so here, the formula for this equation is x minus b over 2a squared. Or it's actually plus x plus b over 2a squared in this case. So this section right here, this section becomes x plus b over 2a squared minus that number plus 8. So what we're going to see here is that for this one, if I plug it in, it's going to equal x plus, and b is the number in front of just x, so that would be negative 2. And then the number in front of a, or x squared, is just 1, so it would be 2 divided by 1 squared, and that would be x minus 1 squared. The number we're going to add and subtract at the same time is always going to be b over 2a squared. So in this case, it's going to be b over 2a squared. B over 2a squared. In this case, we already figured out b over 2a. We already done it right here. So b over 2a, you can see that we solved it and we got negative 1. So this would be negative 1 squared, or positive 1. And then you can see here that this would be negative 1. And we get negative 1 plus 8 is equal to positive 7, and we get positive 7 here. Okay, so I want to think about all of these steps here. So Abdul, please put your phone in the back. Okay, so just going forward, when I come back from spring break, because so many people have their phones out, we're going to take roll from your phones. This is just going to policy I'm going to put forward. Because every time I have to interrupt the class, that's like 10 seconds away from the class, telling you to put away your phone. So unfortunately, when we come back from class, you're going to just have to take roll that way. Okay, so in this case, how we read this is the reason it's called vertex form is because this tells us our vertex. From this, we know that the x value is always going to be the opposite number. So this is negative 1. That means your x value will be positive 1. And your y value will always be exactly the same, which will be positive 7. So if we wanted to check and make sure how the heck did he do this, well, we can check using a method that we already know. So we already remember finding the axis of symmetry, which is x is equal to negative b over 2a, which would be negative 2 over 2 over 1. And we get positive 1. So we already know that the x values match up for our axis of symmetry and our vertex. And if we plug in into our equation, you can see you get 1 minus 2 plus 8. And we get see here. Did I solve this incorrectly? Let's see. -2, we get -1. No, we get +7, and we get the same vertex of 1, 7. Maybe you can see that right here. So just using the old method that we have, you can see that through the vertex form, we get the same vertex we would have gotten if we used the vertex form, plugged in that x value, and then solved for the y value. Okay. So that is one way to check on the test. If you want to check to see whether you have the correct vertex form, so this will be after we come back, you could use this method to check. And this is not the method you can use to solve for the vertex form, because completing the square is something that we'll use on the next, actually in 2 tests. Okay, so that's something that we need in 2 tests. Okay, so what I want to recognize here is that the number that, if I want to go back and kind of analyze completing the square, you can see here that this number, as we mentioned yesterday, without using the formula, if we kind of just think about it, this number is always going to be half of this number squared. Okay, it's always going to be half of this number squared. And we're going to add the same number in the inside and on the outside. And you can see here that the number we have inside the parentheses with the squared, remember, it's always going to be half of the -2, right? It's always going to be half of the -2. So in this case, this is -2. So if we have a new example, and I will go over this new example, we will do this as a class. Oh, I don't want to do odds yet. Let's just say, for example, that, let's do another example together. We have y is equal to x squared plus 4x minus 2. So I want you to either use the formula, or I can ask you to guess or to try and figure out what your vertex would be from this point. If you're dealing with something where there's a number in front of x squared, there's another step we have to do, which you can try and figure out there. So if there's a number in front of x squared, then there's actually another step we have to take. Another step we have to take. So in this case, what I would do is I would write my steps exactly how we did before. I would do 4x. I would add a number, which I don't know at this time. I would subtract a number, which is going to be the same number I add, which I do not know at this time. I know that I'm going to do this twice just so I can write it again. If you don't need this extra step because you know that number, that's totally fine. So just as a reminder that this is going to turn into a perfect square, right? X, and this is going to be plus b over 2a, right? Squared. And then it's going to be minus whatever number, minus 2. And then this is going to be x plus that number. So at this point, what we should do is we should try to figure out what is b divided by 2a. So you could either memorize this or you could figure it out. Those are 2 different ways, but I just want to give you a method. If you memorize the method, it is a little harder. If you figure it out, then that is a little better. So in this case, as a reminder that this number, you could just plug it in, but as a reminder that it's always going to be half of this number right here. So if I wanted to make an educated guess, if I know it's always going to be half, then what number would be right here? 2. So if you guess 2, you are correct. It would be x plus 2 squared. That very same number is going to be here. So it's going to be here, but it's going to be that number squared. So this number that we're adding and also subtracting is going to be the very same number. The only difference is now it is also being squared. This is always the case. This is always the case. Okay? So we could just easily just do that's 4 minus 4. We know that this section, x squared plus 4x plus 4, is going to turn into x plus 2 squared. And this section on the outside is going to be the minus 4, and we get negative 6. So if you got that as your vertex form, good job. Okay. Good job. Okay, I want to go over one hard example, which will not be on your tests, but it will eventually be on one of the tests that you guys have. Okay, so this is an example where you have y is equal to 2x squared plus 4x minus 6. This is the number one problem from yesterday's homework. So if you wanted to give yourself a challenge and you wanted to do this problem, there is actually one additional step you have to do. So I will write this almost exactly the same. The difference is I'm actually going to first factor out a 2 first. So I'm going to factor out 2. What's going to happen is I'm actually going to factor it just from this portion here. So it's just going to be x squared plus 2x. And then it's going to add a number inside the parentheses, subtract a number outside the parentheses, and minus 6. And we'll kind of explain why this makes sense. You're going to do the same thing where you just write it twice. And then we'll go ahead and do equals x plus b over 2a minus a number minus 6, and then we would have our answer that would just probably be the answer there. Okay, so I want us to think through the same thing. We can kind of ignore the 2 on the outside for now, but I want us to think through the same steps. So we know that this number, 2x, is always going to be double the number that is inside the x plus something squared, right? So if I know this number is going to be half of this 2x. What number would I think it would be? Awesome. So it's going to be the half of the number in front of x, right? It would be 1. So this would be 1. Well, this inside the parentheses is going to be that number squared. So we're going to have 1 squared, which is equal to 1. So basically the same thing as we did before. However, I want you to see something here. This number on the inside that we're adding is not actually just 1. What number are we actually adding? So it looks like a 1, but there's something on the outside that changes the number that we're adding there. 2. So what we're doing is we're actually adding 1 squared times 2. So in the number on the outside that we need to subtract is no longer just 1, it is 1 times 2, which is 2 times 1 squared. That makes sense. So the extra step that we need to do is that we need to multiply the number that we're adding. We need to multiply it by the number on the outside afterwards. Okay. So you can see here that because there is a 2 in front, we will do the 1 squared. So we're going to subtract 1 squared, but we're also going to multiply that number by 2. Okay. And so this will turn into negative 2. This will still turn into 2 times x plus 1 squared. This will be minus 2. This will be minus 8. And that would be your answer. So this is like the most advanced version of completing the square because there is a constant in front of x squared. Okay.